Welcome to the Earthworks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons for another Earthworks Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Tyler Bloom of Tyler Bloom Consulting talking to us today. A little bit different than what we typically talk. Tyler, we usually talk about soil and dirt and all that kind of stuff, but having gotten to know you a little bit over the years and know what you're doing, I find what you're doing fascinating. And I think this is a topic that everybody in our audience, certainly all golf course, and I assume you're working sports field work as well, will be interesting. But Tyler is working in workforce development, and we'll get into that, but he also happens to be a grass guy. So what I'd like to do, Tyler, is have you talk a little bit about you personally and your background, because I think your resume is quite impressive. Your golf course resume is quite impressive. So let's impress everybody with that first, and let's talk about how you got into this silly business and where you've been, and welcome to the Earthworks Podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's certainly it's an honor looking at the pedigree of previous attendees. So
we pay a lot of money for these people, you know that, right? Except for you, of course, but we'll do our best.
I don't know about John Chassard or Armin.
Armin was a freebie. We had to pay him. I had to pay him to just talk for only an hour, but it was good. And John, and John, he goes back with us for a long time. In fact, the best blooper stream that we'll have will probably be from John Chassard's podcast, because it was 40 minutes of getting him ready before we could get going. But anyway, so tell us a little bit about you. You went to Penn State, but you have, like I said, I'm going to let you go through this list of places because I'm going to screw up the order. But you've got an impressive resume of places that you've worked. But started at Penn State.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then, let me take it back a step.
Even better.
Yeah, so I started playing golf when I was 6 years old. Absolutely love golf. My family's been around it. My cousin is a golf course superintendent, Ron Garrison at Fox Hill Country Club.
Oh, I didn't know that. I know Ron very well. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that he's your cousin.
That's oftentimes what most people say. Like, I wouldn't repeat that.
I did not know that. That's very fun. No, I love Ron. He's we go way, way, way back and spent a lot of time together. And some of it was stuff that we could talk about, and some that we can't.
Yeah, probably more that you can't talk about.
Most likely.
Yeah, so I had been introduced into this profession at a pretty young age. I mean, I kind of knew. Honestly, since I was in middle school, this is the pathway I really wanted to go into. And I started working on a golf course when I was 15, and it was primarily to play free golf.
Of course, most guys are in the golf course trying to find a way to get that done.
Yeah, so I worked at Berwick Golf Club, small 18-hole, at the time was a private facility. Now it's more semi-private. And then I worked at Frosty Valley Country Club in Danville, which ironically is where Mr. Latch got his first job.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
So there's some
way back when.
Yeah, there's some irony there, like in that story. Not to compare my career path with Mr. Latchaw, but
no. But what's the irony? Go ahead, tell a story. You know it better than anybody, probably.
Yeah. So then I got connected to Matt Schaefer at Marion Golf Club, who most people know was Paul's right hand man at Augusta, and from there it just kind of was I kind of made my way through that circle. Did an internship at Southern Hills in 2007 with Russ Myers for the PGA Championship. And then in 2008, I did my final internship at Muirfield Village working for Paul Jr. And post-graduation, I went to Oakmont for 3 years working for John Zimmers.
That is quite the laundry list. It really is.
Looking back, I mean, seriously, I think at that age, 22, 23, I don't think you really understand the gravity of the kind of pedigree and the reputation to a degree, right? You kind of line yourselves with them thinking it's going to be a springboard. But the commitment level that they have and the dedication and their skill at their craft is, it's the best in the business. And it's a great tree as there's many trees we've talked about that are really successful preparing people. And then, after my time at Oakmont, I went to Sunnybrook Golf Club in Philadelphia working for Scott Kroll, which probably doesn't have the the name recognition, but
But if
Scott's
you know Scott, yeah, Scott's
yeah,
great.
but Scott, his dad Dave was a longtime
Yep,
superintendent, Rolling Green Wilmington Country Club, so still had a pretty strong,
quite the pedigree.
yeah, the mentorship level, even there was not like I went down. And then from there, I landed my first superintendent's job at 27 at Sparrows Point in Baltimore, which, for me, it was the opportunity to, I'm kind of a person that likes to build things from the ground up. That's how I'm wired.
Yeah.
And I like to really take on, I'd say, almost insurmountable challenges to some people.
Yeah.
And I think Sparrows Point presented that. And I was there for 6 years till last June. And, then somehow magically jumped into this role of consulting, which, I think I remember my parents, we talked about this yesterday. My parents were kind of looking at me saying, what in the heck are you doing? Like, here we are amidst the pandemic and you're going to start a consulting business at the age of 33. And I said, yes, I am.
If you think about that, that's the perfect time to start a business like what you're doing. And we talked a little bit about this the other day. I did the same thing, and my mother never understood what I was doing. You're selling what, Joel? I mean, what are you doing? And there is no good or bad time. You get into it because you have a passion for what you're doing, and clearly you have a passion for what it is you're doing, and you take the risk. And I'm confident, and I would say this to anybody. I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I think it's going to be a very successful long-term career. So let's talk about Tyler Bloom Consulting. I mean, this is pretty unique. I mean, you are doing things for guys in this industry that they need very, very badly. And as we talked yesterday, and when I first started talking with you, I think that a lot of guys don't really understand what it is you're doing. And I think it's important that you try to explain that. Obviously you're going to do that better than me, but you and I have talked about workforce development, as you know, and I shared, I think a couple of weeks ago when we talked with Armin. I spent a lot of years as a recruiting manager for corporations prior to starting Earthworks. So I have a little gist of that part of what you're doing, but you're really taking it to a different level for the work that you're doing one-on-one with golf course superintendents. And I'm sure the breadth of that work is even bigger than just golf courses. But let's talk about tell me first, what was the initial vision when you sat down and said, hey, I got an idea for a business model? What was that? What was the first things going through your mind when you started this? And then let's get into what it really is all about today.
Yeah, so it was really built out of necessity as a superintendent to solve a labor issue, and very complex issue of not just being able to find people, but retain them as well.
Right.
And, I, like many people in the country, are dealing with wage scales and not paying people enough. I mean, listen, Sparrows Point, and at all due respect, they just weren't a facility that was keeping up with industry standards. And, and to be honest with you, the talent pool that we were attracting, if you want to call it attracting, most of them couldn't pass a criminal background check.
Right. Which is true on a lot of golf courses, or a drug test, I'm guessing, as well.
Yeah, I mean, get people to show up to work. I mean, It's frustrating. I say that all the time. It's like hitting my head against the wall, because it was the same cyclic cycle. You go through these hiring processes. People either don't show up for the interview, and then they get there on the job, and 2-3 days later they quit. And then you look at the morale of the staff and how that could really, hurt an operation. So, I had a guidance counselor come to my office, and this is the same story I've told many times. I had a guidance counselor come to my office and talk to me about a work-study program utilizing Baltimore County Public Schools students. As a requirement to their graduation, they had to participate in this sort of program. So they're looking for business partners. 6 years later, it became a formalized state-approved apprenticeship program that not only could be offered to high school students, but it could be offered to job seekers or existing employees. My template was the platform was the high school students, because it was an endless supply of people.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at my time, looking back, working for all those great guys. That's really what they did for me, is gave me an opportunity to mentor me. And I was probably just as immature as some of these high school kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So here I had the experience now of recognizing I could actually be a mentor for them. And so, you have to look at this. There were stepping stones. And each year that I had success with one student, it became a success story. Okay. So I built my pipeline internally. I filled assistant positions, spray tech positions, irrigation technician positions, all internally. I didn't post a job. Like when I left Sparrows Point, I didn't post a job in 2 years.
Really? How many people are you talking about? How many people were you able to bring on board at that point?
Through this system, we had 50 students.
Really?
And now 15.
And these were all high school kids?
That's correct.
And what was the retention rate on those kids? I mean, how many of them are in the business now? Do you know?
15.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, as you know, I travel the country and have been for most of my career. I spent 10 years teaching at Rutgers. So because I had that experience at Rutgers, you know, training, working with guys that were going into these, the first question I get almost consistently anywhere I go, hey, do you know anybody? I need an assistant. You know, and we don't even dial down to the fact that, you know, the first, you know, conversation I'm having with the superintendent is, yeah, we're down about 10 guys this year, you know, and last year was really bad because of COVID. And not only were they down 10, 15 guys, but COVID brought 20, 30% more rounds to the golf course. So that multiplied itself exponentially because of the extra play. So, I mean, that's the hardest thing in this business and it's not going to get better, is it?
No. Well, maybe if we can.
Well, let's hope. Yes, I have an idea. Let's start a business.
Yeah, right.
Can I get into the ground floor here?
That's the hope, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, like there was a lot of different things that happened amongst those 6 years. Like I started filling positions for other departments because we were getting so
within
many.
Sparrows Point.
Yeah, within Sparrows Point.
Do me a favor. Let's go back ahead. Just explain because a lot of people don't know Sparrows Point. Talk about the kind of club that it was, and you know, I mean, it's not a top 100 club, I assume. Well, I know, but talk about what kind of club it is, because one of the things I think you probably are running into is a lot of guys think that what you're doing now is, you know, for the top 50 clubs. But Sparrows Point certainly isn't one of those. And look what you've been able to do. What was Sparrows Point like? What kind of a club is it?
It's your middle of the road private facility built in 1956. Went through some pretty tough times after the recession in 2008, really lost their identity, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And great place. It's your blue collar type club.
Right.
Maintenance budget less than $1 million for 27 holes. Average labor, average labor was making $10 an hour when I started. You know, so it's not. And
how many guys were on the crew? How many guys did you have? Or did you want to have?
It ranged from about 20 to 25.
Right. So typical small, middle scale club that you see thousands and thousands of them across the country.
Yeah. There were times though where like literally my first 2 years, we'd be down to like mid-season. We were down to like 12 or 14 people.
In the middle of the season. That's unbelievable.
Because I couldn't hire people and I couldn't keep them on. So I had to really change who I was as a leader just as much as who I was targeting.
Right.
So, you know, again, I think Sparrows Point, that story, it resonates with a lot of people because, you know, in my opinion, knowing the level of clubs there are, it's almost like a glorified public facility.
Right. Yeah. I've been on the property, and you know, I can see how that description would be played, and I don't mean any disrespect, but
no, it's not.
But the point being is that this is a typical golf course, you know, across the country. It's not your top 100. It's not, you know, it's where every Joe Blow golf course looks a lot like Sparrows Point does, you know, and they're hard to get people.
And you asked the question, like, how did I get this vision for it? So what ended up happening was, I would say back in 2017, 2018, I started getting calls from superintendents within the Baltimore, Philly network, even my connections, my friends, my network. And they were saying, how are you doing what you're doing? And I said, listen, I'd love to spend the time to talk to you, but it's worth something.
Yeah.
Time's worth something.
How did they know what you were doing? Were you kind of making this known that you were kind of getting guys where other guys weren't getting them?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think, you know, marketing, you know, utilizing social media to promote our staff, you know, and tell a good story, I think really helped.
Or the first question you get when you're superintendent to superintendent is, hey, do you have guys? Do you have anybody? I mean, that's one of the best networks. It's just asking your buddies in the business, there's anybody running around. But so you found, so the first place you went to is the Baltimore County school system.
That's correct.
Which is brilliant if you think about it.
Well, you think about it this way. Look at these guys like Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney, right? What are they doing? They're recruiting 15, 16, 17-year-olds. Now, granted, those kids' future is going to be making hopefully millions of dollars in the profession.
Right.
But that same sort of mentality or process is what I saw. Instead of, my time at Oakmont and Muirfield is kind of like the major leagues, right? So they're recruiting kids coming from college, not necessarily the high school. I kind of looked at this as maybe this is where we fit in that ecosystem, where we're going to take the high school students and develop them internally, and they might be a feeder to some of these other opportunities. I mean, swear to God, I had board members hiring my employees because they were trained and they were good people.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty funny story.
Hiring them for what? For their companies?
For companies.
Oh, really? Outside of the course altogether, they're stealing your guys.
Yeah.
So
that was a fun one.
So let's talk about that. I mean, high school kids, generally speaking, I mean, everybody in this business has hired a high school kid, and generally they're, they might get what, 20% that are half decent, and the rest of them are, are not the highest quality employee that they've ever had. How do you vet them? How do you get a decent guy in? And then how do you, what do you do once you have these kids, this stream of kids coming in? Obviously you're coaching them.
Right. I think what helped us was that the administrators and the guidance counselors were actually doing a lot of the pre-screening for us.
Wow.
So I would work with those counselors to kind of identify, here's some of the characteristics and personality traits we're looking for in an employee. And then they would target those students who might be more, in athletics, sports programs. They might be in STEM career related, education pathways. And, listen, there was trial and error. I'm not going to sit here and say I've got this,
I can imagine
snake oil solution. That's not the case. It's hard work. But once we were able to connect and have success with one or two of the students, it became word of mouth.
Wow. The kids were going back and saying, hey, this is a great gig. And they're outside and, they're liking what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my two biggest success stories are who are now the two assistants at Sparrows Point, Adam Naravanchek and Andrew Thornton. They started with me at 18.
Right.
Adam's got a 2-year degree from Penn State, and Andrew is more of like a facilities type manager. He's got a certificate in turf from Ohio State. He's got an HVAC and plumbing certificate from an online provider. So, that success story, it just kind of built momentum year after year.
Yeah.
And then those high school students, what I learned in this process too was, as I got more involved with different workforce agencies, state and local, I got connected with other businesses, and I started seeing businesses in manufacturing, IT, healthcare, utilizing this same sort of framework. And I kind of thought, why can we not do it? If these kind of companies that have far more, liability than what maybe a golf course does are having success, like, why can't we?
Right, exactly. And obviously you proved that that's the answer, So what are the challenges by bringing these kids in? I mean, you're talking high school kids. There had to be challenges. I mean, you had to, so let's just, and again, we're staying in Sparrows Point, but, you're bringing these kids in. And so now you've got this crew of high school kids, and we all know high school kids at this point in our life. They're not always the most dependable. Did they all have cars? Did they all have ways to get to the club? And what was the level of training that needed to be done? And I can't imagine that level was variable. I mean, some kids probably picked it up fairly quickly, and others were, we've all seen them. I mean, some of them can't rake a bunker,
Yeah. Well, definitely employability skills were kind of like the first thing, showing up on time, why that's important. And again, the school systems help with that because they're training them like career training in the school system, different than a high school kid that you're hiring for summer employment.
Yeah.
These kids are enrolled in these programs starting in August and September. They're getting some on-the-job training, during the fall, winter months. So by the springtime, they have an idea of where the golf course is. They're excited to get involved into other tasks versus just raking bunkers.
Right.
And honestly, you have more patience as a supervisor to work with them in that capacity versus getting this, 5 or 10 summer employees in the middle of the growing season, you're already, look, there's not much hair left on this.
You're already all the way into it. So I don't have time for you, kid. Just go rake a bunker.
Right. So, I mean, there's a totally different framework of how I introduce that audience of employees into the work site. It also gave our core staff members, some of the older gentlemen, time to connect with them so that it wasn't this awkward sort of exchange, that generational difference. And then, so the basic things like starting out with how to utilize a utility vehicle,
right?
How to rake bunkers, leaf cleanup. During the wintertime, they would help us refurbish accessories. So
these kids were year round?
Yeah, they're year round.
Were they getting credit?
Yes.
School credit. So this is an actual intern at their high school, or is it a vocational school?
Public high schools, and there was one technical school we worked with.
Yeah, I mean, a technical school being a vocational school, what we would know as a where you're finding kids out of ag programs, or is it just technical? I mean,
just career and tech programs, which is
right.
Pretty big.
So these are kids that don't really know what they want to do, and here's an opportunity, a job opportunity. Which, quite honestly, I mean, if you talk to superintendents, a lot of guys, that's how they got into the business. They took it as a summer job in high school, and they, and that was, they fell in love with it. I mean, we talked to Jeff Broadbelt from DryJect a couple of weeks ago, and who well, and Jeff said the same thing. I was a kid. I took a job in the summer as a high school kid, and I don't know what I want to do, but this is kind of fun. And so look at him now. I mean, of course he's goofy, but I hope he's listening. But that's classic.
I had a guidance counselor, African American lady, back in 2016. I brought a number of the guidance counselors from the local schools to come for a luncheon, and to meet our club president, to meet our GM. Kind of give them an exposure to the club, and talk about what our challenges were from employment. And I remember her saying to me point blankly, the biggest challenge your industry faces is that front gate before you come in. It's that almost inclusion aspect that people don't feel that they belong to a private country club.
Right. Yeah. The elitism of it all.
Right. And, obviously that changed in 6 years. I mean, we had a pretty diverse group of, whether it was women, African-American employees, we had Latinos, people with disabilities.
Wow, good.
Veterans. So, I think that's part of the challenge, I think, for a lot of superintendents, is having that open mind that, listen, the traditional frameworks of the type of candidate that we're used to are over.
Right, exactly.
It might take another 10 to 20 years to build that kind of pipeline back up.
Yeah.
And instead of, like, the way I looked at it was, instead of being discriminative and being like so fixated on that, let's call it 40-hour work week, or that they had to work every other weekend or this and that, I was really hurting myself. So I learned how to adjust my scheduling based upon the workforce.
Yeah. Do you think that is going to be something that most superintendents will accept, the fact that the workforce has to change? I mean, it has changed, and it is going to continue this way.
Well, they have no choice. I mean, their only other option is just to deal with it and work crazy hours and be frustrated beyond it. That's not solving the problem.
And not get the job done the way they want to get it done.
Yeah. And again, listen, I always try to engage with whoever I'm working with. I'm not there to tell you how to run your operation.
Of course not. Yeah.
I'm just giving you a funnel of employees and leads. I'm going to give you best recommendation practices that are beyond just our industry. They're transcendent of our industry. It's what construction companies are doing to adapt to this workforce. And guess what? The nice thing about workforce development is, in 10 years, it's probably going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. It's going to always be changing. Yeah. So, what's the status currently with the immigration, the HB system, and bringing folks in from out of the country? Is that perpetual? Is that sustainable at all?
It's hit or miss. I mean,
it's gotten worse, right?
Yeah, it's gotten worse. It's unpredictable.
Right.
My opinion, it's unsustainable. It's like you're fishing for hope. Like you're hopeful that
right. Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then what do you do?
And that's where a lot of guys find themselves. I mean, I've talked to a lot of guys in our area here in the mid-Atlantic where, I didn't get my guys, and that usually is a crew of 15 guys, the core of their summer workforce. And then all of a sudden, boom, that core is gone. And, now you're down to, like you said, 12 guys instead of the 27 that you expected and needed to really keep things going the way you wanted to go.
Well, and listen, you and I talked about this yesterday. Can I help clubs immediately with quick solutions? Absolutely. But what I'm building is sustainable. And I'm going to equate it to what Earthworks does. You build a foundation, you get the good guys on board and get the bad guys out of that.
Right. Change the bus.
Yeah. And you've got to have, like, again, my approach is I'm building a community of resources and networks for a club that isn't going away.
Yeah.
And I'm giving you a playbook to pick from. It may take 3-6 months to develop that because they don't even know we exist. Like they have no clue the club industry exists and the kind of career pathways people can have.
Let's talk about where you are now. So just so people, again, I think there's a misconception as to what it is that you're doing. Yeah. And I quite honestly, and I would certainly say this from my experience after having talked with you yesterday, certainly had no idea the scope of what it is you're doing. So I'm a golf course superintendent. You come into my shop. What are we talking about?
Well, hopefully you're good, right? Everything on the golf course, right? But if there's, somebody's calling me specific for talent, it ranges. It could be about an assistant position.
Yeah.
It could be that, listen, I need general laborers, right? So there's obviously that sort of discovery of what's your immediate issue.
Right.
So the way I typically approach, and this system is it's scalable state to state. I basically start at the state level and I work with state representatives. Could be an apprenticeship council. It could be a task force, such as like an immigrant task force that they're working, on behalf of businesses. And then I filter that down to the local level. That could be a chamber of commerce as a connection, a veterans affair group.
Right.
It could be a high school system, a community college. Every client's different, right?
So you're going out into the community and you're advocating for our industry and you're advocating for talent. You're advocating for skilled, not necessarily skilled labor, but labor. And you're finding, so, I mean, you just listed a laundry list of places to go. I mean, veterans group, you're going into veteran communities or veteran organizations, I assume, and kind of finding people from within those groups. Has that been successful?
What I would tell you has been successful is the continuing discussion with representatives. And to a degree, yeah. I mean, if you look at the resumes that have come in for some candidates, they're having military background.
Which I think would be great, right?
Absolutely.
Work ethic,
Yeah, commitment, dedication.
Commitment, yeah, exactly.
Coaching. I mean, they're
yeah, exactly.
So part of that exploration process is also looking at the facility itself and kind of figuring out what kind of leadership, what kind of staff training do they do? Can I help them set this framework to develop somebody who has literally zero experience on a golf course and give that club a template that's customized for them to develop their internal pipeline, similar to what I have.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So I'm the superintendent, and you're coming in and you're not only helping us find people, but you're also helping me better understand how to manage, vet, recruit, or at least maintain that staff. I mean, we had talked about this yesterday. I'd spent a number of years in corporate America, and we learned all sorts of, you get corporate training. It's radically different than coming into our industry where we as members of this industry, there isn't really that level of training. You're bringing that to the table to a great extent to help guys better understand, how to work with people and keep them. I mean, that's a huge, huge challenge.
It is. And I want to preface this by saying, like, superintendents didn't go to school to learn leadership training and
right. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Like, so, I try to really educate superintendents, like, it's not your fault. Like,
right.
It's just not your fault. You need help.
Right.
Just like I needed help when I was a superintendent. I needed those agencies and those recruiters around me. I created those pipelines.
Yeah.
Your HR department isn't just a recruiter. they're more compliance assistant general managers. So most clubs don't have like a formal recruiting department.
Right, right.
So, not only
And they're not training the superintendent either on leadership skills.
no, it's very, I've had a few interactions, very minimal. I'm going to say 1%, where you get into a dialogue with an organization, not just clubs, but with an organization, and the leadership at the top kind of feels like, well, the department manager is taking care of that. And it's like, how's that superintendent taking care of it when he's fixing irrigation or he's spraying?
Right, exactly. Doing all the other things. I have one of my favorite stories on this topic was working with a dear friend of mine who will remain nameless. But when he had some problems with an employee, I don't know if it was the HR or somebody upstairs, but they sat him down and said, "Well, have you sat down and had ice cream with them?" That was their answer to basically dealing with him. Well, he hasn't come to work in 3 days, and when he does, he's kind of half lost. I'm going to have ice cream with him, and that's your solution. I mean, that's kind of the support that a lot of guys will get in this industry. So hopefully you can change that.
Yeah, and listen, there's some things that are simple tools, right? Just using an applicant tracking system.
Yeah.
Having something like that, a tool that you can pull from your phone to keep that workflow organized, that's a product service that I help them get set up.
Good.
It could be a pre-assessment tool, like we talked about the predictive index, and we don't need to go down that rabbit hole this time, but just trying to understand people's personalities so you can hire the right person beyond the resume, and then onboard that person so they stay longer than 2-3 weeks.
Yeah. How practical is that though, Tyler? I mean, you got, you're running around, you're 10 guys short, somebody walks in the door. I mean, for the most part, and I don't mean this to sound derogatory by any means, but for the most part, aren't guys just saying, "Oh, you can breathe? Yeah, you got a job. Come on in tomorrow morning and let's see if you work out." And I mean, I think a lot of guys work at that most basic level of, if you can breathe and you can show up tomorrow morning, you've got a job and I'll pay you, whatever the rate is. I mean, is that reasonable to assume that we have enough workforce and enough talent internally to vet somebody? Or is that really what you're kind of proposing here as part of your organization?
Yeah, it's part of the service, right? Certainly. Not in many cases, to your point, if it's June 15th, they just need bodies.
Right, exactly. If you can breathe, if I can put a mirror under your nose and it's got steam on it, you're hired.
But it's nice to have that third party, whether it's me or it's somebody else, that's helping you evaluate a resume, have a phone conversation with a candidate. You can pick out quite a bit whether they're going to be interactive, engaging. I think that certainly helps out. I think the goal is, I'm giving you a funnel of leads.
Right.
As that relationship, even with me, matures, we're going to continue to evolve how we screen people. I mean, that's part of the service. It's best management practice.
Yeah,
because
that's
on the same token, I don't want to become somebody who's just bringing in cheap labor and it's not working out and there's a revolving door. Like, there's already staffing agencies out there that are doing that. Go pay them to do that. What you're building with me is a true partnership to help not only bring good people in, but help you and your department or your club put together a framework that they can do it repeatably and sustainably.
Yeah, and I think that's the magic word. And I assume anybody that you're putting in your pipeline, you've interviewed, you've done the vetting process. I mean, you've been in the business, so you know what you're looking for. But you talk to every one of these people, you vet them.
Yeah, and again, there's some times where people just need bodies quickly, and a club doesn't want me to do that. And there's sort of that arrangement where it's they just want names.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And that's okay too. Like, they're going to take it on if they have an HR department that they have their procedures and policies. And I get that. They use me, to help them build that funnel of applicants. So at least they have something to pull from. Yeah,
exactly. You used a term that I want you to describe yesterday when we were talking that I hadn't heard. And I guess this is your term, is the talent ecosystem. Explain that to me again in detail, and anybody that might be listening. What does that mean to you? And help us better understand talent ecosystem. I love the title. I think what you had told me is that this is your little baby here.
Yeah. Well, it's using those different networks.
Yeah.
It could be from a high school student to a veteran to a retiree. And it's really providing those networks for the club in addition to that development, the development of the employee utilizing apprenticeships, which are formalized programs. Some people hear apprenticeship and they think, oh, it's just an internship, or why can't we do that? No, 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 no. It's a U.S. Department of Labor structured and approved program. And it's really a way to show people a vision as they come into a work site that here's how we're going to develop you. And here's the opportunities for you to get some level of certification. Doesn't need to be a 2-year, 4-year degree. So that's part of it as well. But it's really that foundation, that playbook
Right.
of resources that are non-traditional.
Right.
And I think, to pat myself on the back a little bit, I'll go places people don't have time for or even know exist.
Yeah.
And an HR department doesn't even know or exists.
Right. Exactly. And this is the future of labor, right? I mean, this is what we're going to need to be able to do. I mean, are you having a hard time finding resources? I mean, I obviously the clubs are, but this is what you do day in and day out. I'm sure this is your focus, but do you hit a wall at times?
There's an ebb and flow. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, hey, listen, in 5 days, you're going to have this unicorn workforce.
Right. Exactly.
It just doesn't exist. You've got to create it. And part of that ecosystem too is making sure that you have a culture in place that's going to do people right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would tell you that what I have seen thus far is that from an engagement starting point, within 7 to 10 days, some of them are sooner than others, they're starting to get applicants. I would say within 30 to 45 days, they have a pretty steady flow. There might go a week where it's a little bit slower, or, the hiring process might be behind. So I try to help facilitate that, as part of that process and service, to stay in contact with those applicants. How can I assist you getting your resume or application in? Is there something that you don't know exists, right? But now I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't had a hard time finding the resources. It's time sensitive. So if a client engages with me, it's April 8th, and wants a workforce in 30 days of 5 to 10 people, I think you're being unrealistic, to be blunt. Recruitment needs to be a 365 program, no different than your agronomic
point. Yeah.
And I think that clubs that can maybe adopt a year or two of taking people on at different times of the year and keeping them retained, it's going to pay off once they build that pipeline up.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Where are you doing all this? Are you localized to this mid-Atlantic area, or are you starting to expand out beyond this area?
Yeah. So I'm up in the New England, Massachusetts, Boston, Rhode Island, down into Florida, Kansas, Seattle, Washington, Las Vegas.
Wow. So you really are starting to expand out. So you're going into a Florida market, for example, and you're doing this same reaching out to community folks and finding out where the labor pool is, and then and vetting them to see if this would work for our industry. That's basically the model. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and again, those leads are different in every region.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet they are.
And there's some different processes, like the approval process for apprenticeship can be a little bit different state to state, but for the most part, it follows the same sort of sequencing.
Yeah.
And again, every club in their arrangement with me is different. Like somebody who has me on as a true, let's call it 12-month retainer, there's a little bit more vetting on my end. I
would think, yeah. So if you were in my club on a retainer, what are you doing for me on a regular basis? I mean, we're not talking now just finding people. You're also talking about leadership, management, and training. Are you going through the team that's already in place and doing that work for them as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So
you're a coach at that point.
That's correct.
Yeah. And that's you personally. I mean, you're coming into my club whenever we make that arrangement and we have meetings and you teach my assistant how to be better at what he's supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a series of education things.
Yeah.
Ranging. It could be conflict resolution. It could be how to organize my day, how to communicate up, down, sideways. It might be a conflict between two assistant managers, and it's not in a negative way. It's just, hey,
it's real. Yeah.
How can we work better? How can we
Yeah.
communicate better?
Yeah.
That personality aspect is really, really critical. So, and then obviously, we didn't talk about this, and a byproduct of what I've done, and this was not my intentions when I started this business, my focus was on entry level to mid-level management, but I somehow got connected with executive search for superintendent positions.
Yeah. You were telling me that. Yeah.
And so that sort of opened up a whole new pathway and revenue stream. And it's really to help now assistant managers and even superintendents of how to present themselves
Yeah.
For an interview process. It's so,
So you're teaching people how to interview.
That's correct.
Yeah. Which is a skill in its own right.
Yeah.
Yep. Like I said, I spent a lot of time doing interviewing professionally, and I was able to, much like we had talked with Armin, I was able to get people to tell me things they should never have told me in an interview. I mean, it's just amazing. But the amazing thing about interviewing is people that do the interviewing, for the most part, are horrible at it, and really their approach tends to be, I got to find reasons not to hire you as opposed to reasons to hire you. So they ask the candidate all these negative questions, and spin it around,
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's, look, I was on the other side of the table trying to win that big next job. Armin actually was, a person interviewing me. So I learned from the best, right?
There you go.
Blow too much smoke up his butt.
That's all right. He's not listening.
But, I've been through that and understand that sort of preparation. And then now being on the other side of it, sort of more of a technical advisory role.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see what clubs are thinking, what hiring committees are thinking, and maybe the reasons why they made a change. And then to see that evolution through that process of what the committee, after they go through it, realizes maybe some of that onus is on them.
Right.
And listen, they're not experts in golf course management. That's why they're supposed to hire them.
Right. I mean, Greens committee typically in particular. So who's calling you there? Is that a Greens committee or a chairman calling you on a search for a potential superintendent? How's that start?
Well, I think it's pretty varied, whether I'm aggressive to try to go for business, to look for that opportunity. But typically I think it's through referral, right?
Yeah.
So I have a relationship with the PGA of America, which has been really cool and dynamic. That they already were doing executive search for golf professionals, and they kind of felt, hey, we're not experts in turf. We're not experts in golf course superintendent searches. What we're good at is helping structure an interview process and giving a club objective opinion through the process to help them find the right person, not for 2-3 years, but for 10 to 15 years, hopefully. So, that's been a really cool interaction and engagement. And that really was all based upon the conversation of workforce development.
Gotcha. Which makes sense.
And they recognized, again, my network, not just my affiliation with different associations, but the people I worked for. And, not even just that. I mean, I worked with 30 guys that are now superintendents across the country.
Right.
That network is huge. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Well, I mean, and there's obviously that, you're referring to, I guess, what's affectionately called the Latch All Network in the industry, which is certainly one of the strongest. And I know you've worked with, the guys at Robert Trent Jones, another incredibly strong network that Glenn Smickley started. But what you're doing is beyond that. You're taking it to a whole new level of helping these guys get through the process.
Yeah. And I think what's helpful is, listen, I'm also that person that failed short. I know what it's like to be that person that doesn't get that job. I've been that person that got a job. So I think that advice and that, again, objective insight is really helpful. I'm not there to pick the top 5 candidates. That's the club.
Right.
But I will, I think in both processes, St. David's and manufacturers, which I helped with, I was able to correlate and communicate with both parties in an effective way. You want to see people have a good interview. You want to see people tell their story and just be themselves and not get super worked up over things that are out of their control.
Yeah.
And, I learned sometimes things just don't happen, and it's okay. Like it was a different seat to be in. I'll tell you, it's hard when you have good relations with the candidates to
They're friends. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to see people fall short. It's hard.
So what's the advice? I mean, you see this, I see that. I mean, you see a lot of really, really good superintendents who are great grass growers, good people, but they just can't get through that interview. They tend to always come in second, and there's, we all know those guys, and we're all like, wow, that's amazing. This guy is so good. What takes them over that hump to get to that point? And, and you've been there. So, I mean, what's your advice on that strategy?
Well, I think it's
not easy, is it?
Not easy. There's a lot of variables.
Yeah.
There's a lot of variables. You definitely have to have a connection with that committee, and they've got to have a trust and belief that you're the person to take them to their promised land. I kind of use this quote. They have to have certainty in three things. They have to have certainty in you as a leader. They have to have certainty in the product and presentation that you're gonna provide. And they've got to have certainty of the organization that you represent, because part of it is bringing that sort of pedigree or that organizational success to their facility.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're not really, they're at that point in time, they're not even all that concerned about, can you grow grass? I mean, you wouldn't be sitting there if you couldn't, right? So it really, and that's, a lot of guys just get very focused on, I'm a great grass grower, and they probably are, but there's so much more to it than that.
It was really surprising to me that, like, I had this kind of conceptual that there's going to be these big picture moments, aha moments, that somebody's going to break through and that's how they're going to win. It was actually about the low-hanging fruit. It was
really
attention to detail, and not just on the golf course, but the interactions with the golf professional, the general manager, how they build a team, how do they construct their day, how do they organize their day, to be more effective communicators.
Yeah.
It was that sort of low-hanging fruit, not necessarily the big agronomic programs and spray schedules and stuff like that, and projects. Like, that's not what really separated candidates. It was really about the attention to detail.
Right. And I'm sure that's something that you can work with them on and help them understand that from a managerial standpoint. And that goes back to what we're talking about, is just learning the processes. Which is, so, I mean, make sure I'm helping people understand what Tyler Bloom Consulting does. I mean, in a 3-minute or your 30-second commercial, what is it that you're really bringing to the table when a golf course hires you or a superintendent hires you?
Yeah, I mean, I find, secure, and develop talent. I mean, that's in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I utilize a variety of tools, personal experience, and it's the relationships that are untraditional. I mean, I go beyond the traditional framework of sending a job on Indeed or Craigslist.
Yeah, I would hope so, right?
Yeah.
And you're doing some of the vetting, and and you understand the business. So, I mean, these guys, the superintendents, certainly know that, you've been around the block enough to know what they're looking for.
I think so. And again, it's a working relationship too. It's sort of like you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Not going to be perfectly well oiled in the first month, 2 months. It may take some time, but listen, I mean, like I said, we're getting applicants within 7 to 10 days.
Yeah.
And we're making hires within 45 days. That's pretty good. I mean, the cost to hire one person, an average general labor, is about $4,500.
Right. And the cost of, I mean, if they're not there for more than 3 months, the cost goes way up per person. I mean, it's all about retention. I mean, any employer knows the most expensive person, the most expensive thing is losing people, because now you have to start the training all over again. And it's a learning curve, and, it's hard to have, keeping good people on and all that. So when you're working on consignment, that's what you're doing, is you're working with a superintendent and his staff to maintain all the way down to the youngest guy on crew, and helping them feel as they're a part of the team.
That's correct.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, is there a roadblock there ever for an assistant? Or, I mean, there's got to be a couple bumps in the road, I would think. Somebody's going to have an issue. I mean, how do you deal with those types of conflicts? When somebody comes in and he's not well liked on the crew, or he's the goofball on the crew. I mean, what do you do?
Well, I think that's where those personality assessments really help out, because oftentimes it's just self-awareness of what am I doing to contribute to that issue. And I'll be honest, those interactions are few. I think a lot of clubs are really sensitive because of HR purposes. But there are those arrangements where I work with the management team and kind of give them some tips, and having that third party objective opinion can help.
Yeah.
It can help prevent somebody from losing a great employee that honestly just needed a small little tweak in how you were communicating with them, or maybe the preference of their job, task, what they're doing, they're not really suited for. It might be a better fit, being in an individual role like irrigation versus maybe being in a team-based role where they're working with a group of people on, and listen, there's some jobs just have to get done. That's all there is to it.
One of the best, I've had many bosses before I started this company, but one of the best boss I had was the guy knew there was a staff of us of maybe 10 people. And he knew how to work with each one individually, and I tell this story often, but, I was a recruiting manager, and one of my jobs was to be there as HR when somebody came in late. If they didn't come in at 8 o'clock, 3 times in a row, the manager had grounds to fire them. That was in everybody's contract, but they had to have an HR guy there. So they would call down to our department, and I would have to go in and be there for that firing. The problem was I wasn't there because my workload was basically late at night because I'm trying to recruit for somebody, and so I'd work until 7, 8 o'clock at night. All the presidents, the vice presidents would see me there late at night. Oh, this guy's great, but I also wouldn't get in at 8 o'clock. But my boss understood the function that I was accomplishing, and I was doing it well. So understanding everybody's individual strength and what they can really work on, what they're best at in the organization is certainly a talent. And clearly you're working with that and making that all function, which is good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the university school. I mean, the Rutgers, the Penn States, these 2-year turf programs that are clearly on the client. I mean, are there? I don't even think there is one in on the West Coast anymore. Is there? Is there even a turf school out there?
It would be more of like a trade community college than it would be a true, what we would traditional look at, a 2-year, 4-year college.
Right. I mean, in the 90s, when I got into Rutgers, I mean, it was booming. I mean, we were running 100 guys through 100 folks through the program every year. And it was really becoming quite the opportunity. And every one of these folks that came through the program, and there was, obviously mostly guys, but a lot of women that came through, they were all getting jobs. And many of them are still top superintendents in the industry right now. And really, just top-notch, guys and folks in the business. But what's gone on with this school system? I mean, why has that declined so badly?
Well, the pipeline's just not there, right? So I just think people aren't aware of our career pathway. They think the marketing and recruitment from superintendents, again, it's not their fault, but there hasn't been enough advocacy. And listen, with that being said, I think the GCSAA and associations are doing great things. The New York State Turf Association has an ambassador program. There's things like that. The Mid-Atlantic has a youth outreach program. So those things are happening. But that's, to me, is people don't know we exist. And so how can a parent advocate for somebody going to a 2-year?
Oh, good point. Yeah.
To spend $80,000 to $100,000 if they don't really know what the career pathways are.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, because I bet a lot of people don't know that. I mean, they look at their son or daughter who's kind of lost in their career ideas, and then they spend all this money to go to a 2-year turf program, and they don't even know what I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to cut grass the rest of your life, and they don't realize how incredibly professional this opportunity is, and that there's a lot of growth and a lot of potential income growth.
Yeah, and I think again, just thinking outside the box or thinking out loud, that's where that apprenticeship model comes in. Is you have to refill that pipeline and get people interested, but they need the on-the-job training. Like this
exactly.
This is an employer. It's an employer issue. It's not necessarily a university. It's not necessarily. It is a university challenge, but It's the recruitment side. People need to know what it's like to work on a golf course, sports turf.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this, is it's beyond just becoming a golf course superintendent.
Yeah.
You have distribution, manufacturer, equipment technician, needs,
Sales. Yeah.
sales, right?
Yeah.
So I think as an industry, we're getting better at educating people, but it's the long play.
It's a huge industry if you think about it. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in our industry. I mean, I don't remember the numbers, but it's in the billions as to what we, represent. And not only that, we talk a lot about this, and, I mean, we're also providing open space, green space. We're keeping oxidation process. I mean, you can get really esoteric with all of what we're doing, but it's an environmental thing, and we're outside. And, I mean, look what happened during COVID. We were one of the few places that people could go because we're outside. And it boomed during last summer when nobody could do anything else. And let's hope that the momentum that we gained with COVID is maintainable. Let's hope that as an industry that we can keep these young guys and young gals that are coming in to play golf because it was the only thing to do, excited about the game of golf. I mean, we all talk about the Tiger Woods syndrome. When Tiger first came into the business, was the best thing that ever happened to all of us, because wow, everybody's talking about golf now and wanting to play golf, and it's a great opportunity. I mean, it's a great industry. Obviously, you and I have grown up in it and lived in it, and and love it, and have made careers out of it, and had made careers for a lot of people working with us out of it. So how do we get, on a very global basis, how do we get that word out?
Starting with your communities.
I like that. I love that approach. I mean, like I said when we started this, Tyler, I love the approach that you're taking. I think that what you're doing is bigger than finding a guy for a crew, and I hope that you can maintain that momentum for a very, very long time. I think it's important that guys get some leadership training. I think it's important that, like you said, I mean, the analogy you brought in was, you've got an agronomic plan. How can you not have a labor plan, as powerful as your agronomic plan? And we spend a lot of time on the agronomy of the golf course, but without people, the agronomy, it doesn't matter because it's not there anymore. So, I see you and me doing the same thing on different spectrums on that side of things, which is good.
Listen, I lived it. I know the pain of not having people.
Yeah.
And you've got these stakeholders, regardless of what level of club you're at, there's an expectation that if you're paying for a service and you're not getting it, well, somebody's not doing they're thinking somebody's not doing their job. Right. And again, a superintendent is there's such a diverse role in what they have to do and all the different levels of constituents they have to deal with. They don't have time for recruiting. To me, it's a no-brainer to have help. It's not a weakness.
Right.
I hear a lot of superintendents when they engage with me sort of feel like it's their fault. It's
right.
Not your fault. You need help, and so does your club.
Yeah.
Because it's not just your department. I've learned that here in the last 6 months, specifically that it's an issue in the clubhouse operations, the golf shop. Oh my Lord. You talk about the openings.
Yes, exactly. That's even worse at times.
Right. And that role for many facilities requires a level of playing skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you're working in the whole club. You're not just working for the superintendents, but you're now expanding out into the entire club operation, which is good.
Right. And it's a win-win. It's a
win-win.
It's a partnership. This is not listen, I'm not coming there to sell necessarily a product or a snake oil thing. This is a true partnership.
Yeah, I do that. You leave that to me. Yeah, I know.
For sure. Well, I don't think so, but I've used your product, so I know what it does.
Thank you.
But
no, I mean, you're providing a valuable service, and it's just a matter of them, realizing the value that you bring to their table. And, there is no more important thing right now than labor. And like I said to you yesterday, and when we started today, I think what you've got here is huge. And I really think people should sit down and take some time and really think about building that plan. And you know, with your support and help on that, I think I can't imagine that's an easy job for anybody in our business, because that's not what we're trained to do. So having an advocate like you would really be great. I hate to say this, but we're pushing up against an hour. But let me ask you this: if somebody wants to reach you, how do they find you?
Well, I think most people probably see me on social media.
There you go.
Twitter handle is @tbloom_golf. They can go to my website, is www.tbloomllc.com.
So we're just going to call you T Bloom from this point on, I think, you know, because that's the easiest way. That's how I found you when I needed to get your number the other day. Just type in T Bloom and you came up, which was great.
Yeah, it's kind of like my parents could laugh at it. They're like, man, we put your name in Google and like all this stuff comes up.
Right,
like,
exactly.
I say,
some of it's probably not good knowing your cousin, but I'm sure it's easily found. But you know, people should reach out to you, and I you know, there's a lot of information on your website that kind of explains some of this. I hope people aren't intimidated, having got a chance to know more now what you're doing. I think the service is exceptional. I think it's incredibly valuable, and having an advocate on your side that can build a labor force schedule is just, it's as important as anything else that these guys do. And it's yet again another one. I mean, they go to Rutgers and Penn State or wherever, and they learn how to grow grass. You know, we talk about soils and how to read a soil test, but there is never a class on how to build a labor management, you know, portfolio for for the long haul. We don't learn that, and it's gotten worse. I mean, you and I talked the other day about, you know, guys out in California that I'm working with, they're paying $20 an hour for a crew guy. That's tough when they, you know, the same guy can go to McDonald's for $22 an hour in air conditioning, get a free hamburger for lunch, and, you know, go home at night. Of course, they, you know, it's still McDonald's, but, you know, you're not outside in fresh air, but that's a tough competition. So, you know, I wish you the very best of luck. I can't thank you enough. I think we may want to do this again, because I think there are some topics that you and I could explore that would take us to some of the some of the training kind of stuff, as opposed to just talking about T Bloom and what you do. But I think if we can get back together and do some discover how we go about building that model, I think that would be fantastic. And I hope we can encourage you to join us again on this, and maybe we won't have as much road noise behind us, and we can do it. It can be a little bit more effective than maybe what today was. But Tyler, I wish you the best of luck. I would encourage anybody to reach out to T Bloom anywhere you can find T Bloom, and thanks for coming on and joining us today. And did I miss anything? Is there something that we need to finish with that I've left off the table?
No, I appreciate it. Great opportunity. And listen, it's non-contractual. Somebody just needs to talk to somebody and have a question. Reach out to me. A lot of conversations are like that. It's a brethren, right? It's a brotherhood.
Yeah, it is. It's always has been. And yeah, like I said, you've got the personality for it, and you're certainly really building this. And you know, I think in the next couple of years we're going to see you all over the country. And unfortunately, your daughters might not see you as much, but they'll learn how important Daddy's work is, and it'll be good. But you know, 10 years from now, we're still going to be having labor conversations. You know? That's
the beauty of this. It's that next conversation, it's going to evolve, because it's changed a year. If I would have said to you a year ago where I'm at now, I would have said,
yeah, exactly. Well, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you are not a subscriber to the Earthworks podcast, please join us. We are continually finding fascinating people like T Bloom to come and join us and talk to us about what's going on in the industry, and we're going to continue that. So thank you again, Tyler. Appreciate it, and thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will be back next week for another Earthworks podcast.